Hello, Sociology 322. It is Wednesday, February 11th. Today's lecture comes from the observation that when someone takes a class on religion, you would expect there to be all sorts of conversation about religious beliefs. What does one religious group believe, or what do religious individuals believe? What do surveys show about Americans' beliefs? All this sort of thing. What's interesting for the most part is that belief has a very unsettled role in sociology, especially these days. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to take you through what I call three views of belief in sociology. Oh, and by the way, I didn't write the schedule for today, so I'll tick that off right now. Three views of belief in sociology, which includes Max Weber's argument, which you read for yesterday. I'm going to take a few questions from your papers, and then I'll introduce the readings for tomorrow. And then we'll keep moving along. This will likely be the only lecture for this week, because I think I can kind of bring it all into one, save you a little time. And keep questions coming if you have any. We'll be to the midterm in 2 weeks from now, so you don't want to wait for them. I'll be in touch soon with information about that midterm. And excuse me, I've got one heck of an attack of allergies, so if I'm a little off today. So jumping right in. I always like to think about the sociological study of religion by thinking of it, seeing what's different of the sociological study of religion from other approaches to religion. For example, if you were to take a course in religious studies department, or possibly a course in theology at a religious university or religious school or seminary, you'd probably spend all sorts of time thinking about and studying the belief statements of religious groups or religious individuals. But for the most part, that doesn't show up in sociology. So part of my lecture is to kind of ask the question of why that is. And I categorize this under three views of beliefs in sociology. The first view is basically that beliefs mean nothing. The most articulate, or maybe most dominant idea of this view, it basically comes from Karl Marx, where beliefs have a role in terms of sociologically understanding action, but the beliefs in themselves don't cause anything. In Marx's view, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, in Marx's view, basically beliefs are a way to justify, particularly religious beliefs, were a way to justify the dominant economic relations of the day. So Marx would point to Christian teachings about maybe turning your cheek, or giving money to the poor, or basically kind of giving charitable money to the poor. He might look at those and say, aha, this is great evidence that these religious beliefs, all they do is legitimate the inequality in the economic system and encourage passivity, not real change to basically bring about equitable distribution of wealth in our society. So that's kind of the most overt sociologist saying, well, beliefs really mean nothing in and of themselves. They don't cause something, they are caused by something else. Another voice in this strain of maybe beliefs mean nothing is Pierre Bourdieu, who some of you may have encountered in your classes. He was a theorist who only died within the last 10 years from France, one of the most influential sociologists of the 20th century. He's a little bit more careful than Marx in basically spending some time kind of attending to the ways that people see the world differently. But really interestingly is that Bourdieu spends very little time talking about religion, and for the most part continues to see human action as defined by things like economic capital, social capital, cultural capital, all these basically resources that humans can use as they kind of go through their day or their lives in society, basically oriented in trying to have the most cultural and economic and social capital that they might be able to get within their certain social framework. So again, beliefs in terms of these core statements of religious traditions really don't show up in his sociology. And then finally, one other voice within sociology about why beliefs may mean nothing comes from what a lot of people tell sociologists today. Think for a second. You may have had a conversation, especially with college-age people, maybe your peers or your friends, when inevitably it's one of those late night conversations in a road trip through the desert, the sun's set, you got 3 more hours to get to Tucson, and all of a sudden the conversation turns to spirituality or religion. This may not have happened to you. And oftentimes people say things like, well, it's not about what you believe, it's not about what you believe, it's that you believe. Dwight D. Eisenhower made a similar statement at one point in his presidency, which some people have questioned whether he actually said it, but it's become quite powerful, which he basically said, well, I don't care what a person believes in as long as they believe in something. So those sort of statements tell us that, well, maybe differences in the content and belief have absolutely nothing to do with human action or with human societies. So that's one view of what beliefs are. A second view of belief basically kind of comes from a social psychological strain of research, which sees beliefs as something like an attitude. So beliefs are kind of these cognitive packets that are embedded somewhere inside of us, most notably in the mind, that give individuals or groups of individuals an orientation to think about certain social issues and actions and to behave in certain ways. So classic idea or a classic example of beliefs as these kind of cognitive attitudes is a classic question from sociological surveys. For example, do you believe in God? Another question from surveys that was meant to gauge how Christian a person was or a society was do you believe in Jesus? And then a more recent question that's landed on survey the last couple of decades, which is meant to show that there's actually a range of beliefs in a society, is a question like, do you believe in UFOs? Those 3 questions are all questions that land on surveys quite a bit, and they're basically meant to kind of pick up and kind of an underlying attitude that then sociologists will use to connect with other attitudes or behaviors, spending behaviors, job history, political attitudes, political behaviors, all that sort of stuff to see if there's a correlation or a causal relationship between these particular religious beliefs and all the other stuff sociologists are interested in. Now, there's some problems with this approach, and you've probably thought about this before. One is that a lot of surveys in the United States have been very Christian focused, so there's not, in some ways, not a lot of variation in terms of the beliefs that are measured. That's breaking down as the country has gotten more religiously diverse, but it has been a problem. Another problem with these sorts of questions is oftentimes the survey format, some critics say, forces people to have an opinion. So if you ask somebody, do you believe in God? Well, in U.S. culture where it's very legitimate to believe in God, where oftentimes kind of people are considered on the outskirts of the group if they don't believe in God, and in fact we know sociologists that one of the least likely groups to ever have a member elected to the presidency are atheists because they're often distrusted by other Americans. And given all these conditions, if you ask somebody if they believe in God, there'll usually be quite a large amount of kind of social pressure to decide, to say, well, yes, I do believe in God. Or to have opinion on a particular religious belief question that's asked. Then we get the next problem with these sorts of questions is they don't necessarily tell us much about what they mean. So for example, if we have a question like, do you believe in Jesus or do you believe in Buddha? All those give you a yes, no, and maybe a don't know what people are saying. However, within those respective religious traditions, there are long-running arguments and histories and debates about who this Jesus figure is or who this Buddha figure is. In some traditions, the figure is seen as a very divine figure, kind of close to or the same as God. In other traditions, in both the Christian and Buddhist tradition, those figures are presented as very kind of grounded human figures, which is very different than seeing as kind of these overarching divine know-it-all figures that also go in those arguments. So just a survey question alone doesn't tell you where an individual falls in kind of those broad conversations about belief that go on within religious traditions. Then also within the school, it assumes or this of approaching belief as a cognitive orientation, it usually assumes a certain consistency. So if we're sociologists looking at a survey of people's answers to beliefs, we'll oftentimes kind of assume, unless we can survey again them down the road, that these are kind of these beliefs that people answer yes to on a survey are really these underlying orientations that kind of point